Hey everybody, welcome to the Song Revolution podcast, brought to you by Nashville Christian Songwriters. Nashville Christian Songwriters exists to empower Christian songwriters worldwide. I'm John Chisum, and this podcast exists to bring you valuable songwriting insights, inspiration, interviews, and just all around good fun with some of the greatest songwriters, producers, arrangers, artists, and creatives, and beyond. You can find out a whole lot more about us at NashvilleChristianSongwriters.com. Hey everybody, John Chisum for Nashville Christian Songwriters and the Song Revolution podcast. And we are in a wonderful place today with the amazing, talented, and kind of sneezy Audrey Assad today. Audrey, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Chew.
Yeah, right. Kind of allergy season in Nashville,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Well, a lot of us kind of suffer from that, but don't eat wheat. I think that's like the day, the
It
deal of the
helps
day.
me a lot, yeah.
Cool.
It helps me a lot. But yeah, still have my days, and today's one of those days. And hopefully this Benadryl kicks in soon.
Absolutely. Well, if you start snoring during the show today, we'll know that it works. Cool. Well, I'm sure that many of our listeners are very familiar with your music and your career, but just amazing, deep, layered, crazy, beautiful music that you do. And oh yeah, I mean, been a fan for a long time. And my daughter, Allie, she says hi. She's been a fan as well.
Oh, that's sweet. That's awesome.
So just a tiny bit of background for those of you who might not be as familiar, you're going to love Audrey and her music. And her debut album, The House You're Building, released through Sparrow in July of 2010. It really became the Christian album of 2010, which is a big deal, on Amazon.com, and the Christian Breakthrough Album of the Year on iTunes. And she's worked with and toured with a bunch of great people like Chris Tomlin, 10th Avenue North, Matt Maher, Jars of Clay, some great people. So, yeah, and you've done a bunch of records since then. We can talk about some of those.
Sure.
I'd like to spend a little time just on your background a little bit. You have a very interesting upbringing, and so maybe just tell us a little bit about kind of how you got into this, a little of your background.
Sure. Well, I was raised in New Jersey, and I was part of a denomination growing up called Plymouth Brethren, which is relevant because I'll explain why. But it was a very small and kind of reclusive Christian sect. And one of the main sort of disciplines and practices of it was that women could not pray out loud, read scriptures out loud in front of males, sing in front of the church, teach in any way. Once your own son was over the age of reason, you were not permitted to usurp authority over him in any kind of scriptural setting. And so you couldn't be the one to teach Bible lessons at home if you have a 12-year-old son, that kind of thing. It was a very interesting background, and so I mention it because I think it's pertinent to how I actually ended up being a songwriter, because I am very opinionated and I have a lot of thoughts. And I think at some point, music was something that I've always done, and I've always been a piano player. And I sang a lot at home, but I never really had an outlet for that. I didn't write songs because writing songs would be teaching. That was what I was sort of taught. So I didn't get my start as a songwriter till I was 19 years old for that reason. I think I had the songs in there, but I just didn't know what I would even do with them. So my father's Middle Eastern, and he's from Damascus, Syria. So I grew up in a multi-ethnic, multicultural home with an American mom, Middle Eastern dad. And it's weird because as antithetical to worldliness as our church background was, my father was a little bit of a rebel in that, he worked in New York City, owned his own company, worked with people who weren't Plymouth Brethren, which was not typical. We were sort of encouraged not to do that, to be unequally yoked, extended to more than marriage. So if you had a business partner who wasn't Plymouth Brethren, that was considered being unequally yoked. My dad bucked a lot of those things. And so because of that, he exposed us to a lot of cultures and ideas that I think I wouldn't have had access to had I been someone else's daughter. So I grew up going to New York City many times a week to meet him for dinner with my family. And my first job was in New York City when I was homeschooled, and I worked part-time in New York. So by the time I graduated high school, homeschool high school, we were moving to Florida, and I was leaving behind some of these ideas about myself. And when I was 19, I decided I would try my hand at writing music, and it was just the most natural thing in the world for me. I didn't know it would be, but it was. And then from there, I've just kind of walked forwards as doors have opened. But you mentioned 10th Avenue North, and I wanted to mention them again because at that time when I was 19, that was when I met Mike, who is the lead singer of that band. And we were in a really amazing little musical community together in West Palm Beach for many years. And so he was one of the reasons I came to Nashville, because he moved up here and his band got a record deal a couple of years before I did. And he called me and said, "You really should come. This is just, it's silly that you're down there, and you should come up here and try this out." And so that's how I ended up in Nashville, was through members of my community who had already tried it out and kind of paved the way for me a little bit. So that's kind of how I became Audrey Assad, singer-songwriter in Nashville, Tennessee.
And here we are.
Yeah.
With allergies and everything.
Yes.
Well, your first record commercial release was really only 7 years ago.
Right.
And that's not a long time.
No.
And you've had an interesting career path, kind of walking away a little bit from some of the industry side. A little bit. I mean, you're really
the
doing
establishment of it.
You're right.
Yeah.
So do you feel like talking a little bit about that? Because you are a strongly opinionated person who with, and for good reasons. So
so I did 3 records, 2 records and a live project with Sparrow when I first came here. I was a staff writer for a while first. I signed a record deal, made 3 projects, and by the middle of the record cycle of my 3rd record with them, I was becoming painfully aware that I didn't like the way we did anything. And I think I realized that in a way too late. I had obviously signed a contract. I didn't know anything when I signed that contract. But I took a vested interest in how it all worked. And so as I became aware of how recouping works and how record budgets work and how the label recoups versus the way that I recoup, and it's just this whole science, in a way that I didn't understand when I got into it. Well, I started to observe some of the methods that were being used, and I felt that they were incredibly, Stone Age, And we would create content, spend all these thousands of dollars for exclusive whatever website. And I'd be like, let's see how many clicks we're getting from that, and they're like, oh, okay, so we would analyze it. I go, wow, I got 2 clicks to my website from this $5,000 video we made. Do you think that's really worth it? Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, we just always have done this. This is what we do. And I'm like, that's not good enough, So I was sort of like, well, we're wasting money that I'll never make back. So I just started to be a little bit of a squeaky wheel, I guess. And creatively, I was frustrated because I knew that I was capable of more than they were allowing me to do in a practical sense, as a producer, in a songwriting sense, as a person who believes in breaking the rules once in a while. And I basically asked them, what are we going to do? If we don't change this, I'm just going to stop. And I had an A&R person who believed in me and who was willing to kind of go to bat for me as much as possible. So we tried that, for 9 months to find something that would work for both of us. And then at the end of the day, they said, you know what? We're just going to let you go, which was the best thing I could have asked for, but I couldn't ask for it. Then they would know that's what I wanted. But they did give me that. And so then I struck out on my own, making religious music still, but in a very different vein than where I had been going. Because what was really happening for me at Sparrow was that I was being pushed into a sort of well, I just distinctly remember they were like, we think of you as our Christian Ingrid Michaelson. And I was like, I'm my own person. And I want to do pop music and I want to do worship music, but I don't want them to be smushed together like this.
I always wanted to be Stephen Curtis Chapman, but I didn't get to do that.
Man, we already have a Christian Stephen Curtis Chapman.
Oh, that's right. Shoot. I wasn't secure enough in myself.
Yeah. So I just left it behind and have been trying ever since to do what I want to do. And I've found that, at least in today's landscape, a lot of the things that maybe used to be rules because they made sense no longer do make sense, and people are much more flexible to an artist's, not caprices, but different outlets, than I think maybe they used to be. Right. And I think Spotify and all of those kind of discovery tools have played into that quite a bit in a positive way for me. So,
I mean, you have your own record label now, Fortunate Fall Records, and I mean, great record, by the way.
Thank you.
Love it. So obviously you're unafraid to carve your own way, to make your own path, and I think that's something that true artists really are all about. Not just going along with the status quo just to kind of fit into a mold. So kudos for you, for branching out and doing that, which kind of makes me want to ask about the motivations for your art, to the kind of things that have driven you into this. We've had a little bit of the journey into it, but can you take us a little bit inside the inner motivations, kind of what's driving you with continuing to do religious music and, that whole thing?
So religious music is its own animal in that it involves catharsis, but it is not purely for that. I wouldn't call it utilitarian, because I think beauty is the most important goal of it, or at least for me. But it has like a pastoral element that makes it hard to, I guess, be as authentically whatever it is you are, because you're not just making it for you, you're making it for other people who, will find a home in it. So I really value it, though. I think my aim is, and has been for a while with my devotional stuff, my worship stuff, to be that record for people who don't buy those records. And because I am one of those people who has 95% secular, quote unquote, music in my library and 5% not. And those records are ultra special to me because of how rarely I connect with one. And so my goal, I can't be guaranteed that I'm going to achieve this, is to be that record for people like myself. So I feel like I know who I'm talking to. I know who I'm making music for. And it's people not just exactly like me, but like me in that way. I also have a very real need for catharsis in art. And what I have decided to do is to take that need and put it into other projects, because I don't want to belabor my religious work with all of my angst. Even though I try to carve out room for that, because I think worship music has done a piss poor job of doing that as an industry, which it is an industry, but not too much. Not so much that it doesn't leave room for people who aren't wallowing in the depths of despair like I might be. So I try to balance things with, scripture and, tradition and spiritual writings that I'm inspired by with my own human experience. And then over here in my other projects is where I kind of go to wallow. And it's working for me. I mean, as a person anyway, I really love having these different places to make what I make. But making religious and Christian worship music is important to me because it is a huge part of my story and who I am. And I want to make those records that I want to get, that I want to buy. So that's kind of why I do what I do there and how I do it.
It's wonderful. A lot of the clients that I work with, aspiring songwriters, is they've had some kind of deep pain in their lives, whether they were abused or divorced or something, and they feel like if they could just write songs about their pain, the whole cathartic kind of thing, that they're going to connect with people. And so I kind of dance around this a lot, and I talk with them about not just putting a positive spin on things, because I don't believe in that, right? Happy, clappy, Jesus-y kind of songs aren't going to make the pain go away, right? But to just, without beauty, without some depth, without something to, like, I think you have a song called Lament. Did I hear that? Yes. And then, because I've been on a crash course on your music the last week, it's like, I got to know this girl's music. But there is a place for lament. It's not on the Christian radio, but it's definitely, there's a place in Christian life about that. So I talk to my clients a lot about redeeming their pain, whatever that means, because the world has a lot of pain. So for them just to sing, I was abused, I was molested as a child, does that really help? That was a very bad little fake song I just sang. But I talk to them about this. So what would you say about the role of maybe pain, angst, catharsis? Because you do such an amazing job of bringing that into some hopefulness, even in the lament. I mean, even in crying out to God.
Right.
What would you say about those kinds of things?
I mean, I think there's no rules, but I think the guidelines I've picked for myself are different for each of my outlets. With worship music and music for the church, I try to model it after the Psalms, pretty simply. That's where I look and I go. David did say a lot of very despairing things. He also would point to the promises of God routinely to remind himself of them in order to contextualize his pain in the greater story of the world that he believed God was telling. So that for me is what constraints I have chosen for my church records, because I think it's humanizing and cathartic, but not indulgent or self-indulgent, I guess. However, with I have a band called Lev that it is with another guy that, my bandmate's not a Christian, and I am, albeit an uncertain one, but I am one, and we make songs that abide by none of those rules, because I think there's a total place for songs that their only goal and function is to validate the experience of your own life and someone else's life, to make somebody feel not alone in what happened. And both of us I have some pretty serious trauma in my background, and so I think found a way to write songs about that aren't despairing, but they don't pull any punches. And I think it's important, even if those songs don't make it to albums, I think it's important for people to spend time trying to write them, because that can actually be such a mechanism of healing for someone to just experience their pain in that way through music. So, like I said, I think for worship music, the rules or the guidelines have to be somewhat different if you want it to find a home in a wide way in the church audience. But I just say, what would David do? That's my rule or my guideline.
WWDD.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Cool.
I haven't made any bracelets for that.
Yeah, I know, right? It could be a merch item for you, I guess. Back of the room sales. Well, I think you made some amazing points just then, but the whole thing about contextualizing. Yeah. It's so important, and it's hard for people to contextualize, especially painful things, right?
The problem is, in my opinion, actually, is that there's not enough willingness to really go into the darkness and look at it and acknowledge it for what it is in its full scope. So for speaking as someone who has endured abusive situations of various types, I can say on the other side of many years of therapy that it never healed or began to heal until I was willing to do the work of calling it what it was, of admitting its full scope, of discovering its full scope. So it can seem, I think if you meet someone in a particular place on that journey, it can seem like they're wallowing, but they might just be in the phase of that discovery process, which is an integral piece of the process. You can't heal from a wound that you don't know is there, and there were lots of things in my past, not that were necessarily repressed. I remembered them on a level, but I didn't fully understand what they had done in my psyche and in my emotions and in my relationships. Mm-hmm. And so all that to say, contextualizing that takes understanding it, and then you can contextualize it. But the church is not great overall about maybe teaching a practice of things like that, of introspection and of counseling for most people. I think most people probably need it. Not maybe on the level that I have needed it for the things I've needed it for, but the church does not, it tends to contextualize before it acknowledges, which I think is why people find themselves itching to write those songs so much, because they're like, I just want to, I don't want to ignore this big gaping hole in my heart, And so, in my opinion, there's a place for all of that. And I don't think the church really carves out a lot of space for it. Does that make sense?
Right. Oh, total sense. Total sense. You said so many rich things. I'm not sure quite where to dive in, but I could have chosen any one of about 100 songs that you've written, but Oh My Soul. Mm-hmm. And I would like to just quote some of the lyrics because you're obviously deeply into, and I want to come back to the writers that have influenced you, songwriters as well as authors and theologians, ancient documents, all that kind of stuff. But you obviously are all about the authenticity, the honesty, that depth. I mean, when you write things like rivers and stones and the trees of the field, they sing in the night, and 1,000 tongues lay deep in your lungs to raise to the sky. Don't lie to yourself, oh my soul, love your God. Deep in your heart, I love this line, I'm going to cry. Deep in your heart, you feather and tar your folly and fear. Expose them all for the fools they are, and the world becomes clear. Don't lie to yourself, oh my soul, just love your God. Your worries will never love you, they'll leave you all alone. But your God will not forsake you, oh my soul. My soul. Now that's such a beautiful example to me of someone redeeming. It's acknowledging the folly and the fears and all those things, and yet calling yourself, and to whatever extent you can in that moment, to like, okay, shut up, worship God.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me that song is not meant to downplay pain, but more to like I always write the songs that I need. And because they do not, because that is not what I'm doing, not because this is how I always respond to my pain. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, I wrote that. I don't even remember why I started writing it, honestly, like what experience or what suffering was there. I just know that, again, I think it's Psalm-like, if I may make that comparison. It feels arrogant, but Psalm-like in the sense that it is about reminding yourself, about preaching the gospel to yourself. And that's what most of my religious work is about. There's a quote that I'm going to butcher by Thomas Merton. It's at the end of the whole thing he writes in one of his memoirs, in one of his journals. But he says, and basically he's talking about how when he enters into the pain and the suffering of his heart deep enough, what he finds there is God sitting among the ruins, preaching the gospel to the poor, which is him, And that's kind of where I'm always trying to get. And I don't always get there, but that's where I want to be. So, that's what I'm trying to do.
In the silence of my heart, I hear you speak. Is that I was just listening in the car on the way over here, and it's like, I love that.
That's again, and it's inspired by, the quote from Mother Teresa. She says, "In the silence of the heart, God speaks." It's a very simple sentence, but I think it's one of those concepts that I could explore till I'm old and gray, and I wouldn't quite have reached the depths of that.
Right? Well, let's talk a little bit about writers that have influenced you.
Well, I grew up, again, my background is so full of quirks because I just sit here describing this weird cult-like Christian upbringing. It was very cult-like in many ways. But my mother, who towed the line on most of the traditions of that, was a little bit, again, rebellious in music choice. We were not allowed to listen to most modern things, but we did have this steady rotation in our house of 70s folk music and some 70s rock music, depending. So basically it was James Taylor, Paul Simon, Simon and Garfunkel, John Denver, Carly Simon, and Fleetwood Mac.
Nice.
And I grew up on almost exclusively the greatest hits of those people, so I apologize to all the purists out there, but that was my mom. She was a best of record buyer. Billy Joel was a huge one too for me. And so those were the musical influences of my childhood. My dad brought in French music, Arabic music, and Jewel. Weirdly enough, obsessed with Jewel. So I, again, grew up around a very strange little small pool of music, but some really good stuff. And then as I left high school or got later into high school and started buying records for myself, I got very into Sarah McLachlan, and I got very into some of the more alternative rock stuff of that day. So I didn't grow up listening to Christian music at all, which was weird that I was allowed to listen to what I did. The first Newsboys record I ever borrowed from a friend, my dad said, "Return that. That's, too heavy." And so it was more about the intensity of it. But I didn't hear any worship music till I was probably 18. So it didn't really influence me very much, which I actually think is maybe a helpful thing in some ways for me as an artist. As far as, literature, I'm an avid reader and have always been. And, grew up loving Jane Austen. I loved King Arthur. That was something I loved. And I now am, read a lot of spiritual writing, but am very sort of steeped in Tolstoy, and Richard Rohr is someone I've read quite a bit of the last few years, Thomas Merton. A lot of the kind of fringe Catholics is who I find myself to be influenced by these days. And I say fringe in the sense that the establishment probably looks at them a little bit like side eye. But I find, and Mother Teresa is one of those, I think, in some ways too, because of her many years of doubt and spiritual darkness. And I find those people to be incredibly inspiring and hospitable to me from across the years.
I'm so thankful we know that about her.
I know. It was really great because I remember all the, I don't want to use a broad brush, a lot of the Catholics who suspected all along she was kind of a heretic were like, see, we told you. And a lot of the evangelicals who all along had sort of suspected that were like, see, we told you. And, those of us like myself were sort of relieved and so blessed to know that part of her journey, because it incredibly it makes you feel so much less alone in the universe. But my favorite author is probably Madeleine L'Engle. She is
Walking on
probably
Water.
My favorite.
Yeah.
I've read almost everything she's ever written, and it's the 10th anniversary of her passing this year. So I'm trying to finish everything she's ever written by the end of this year. All her memoirs, her poetry, and her novels, obviously. But
right. That's awesome. I'm kind of into all of those writers as well. Brennan Manning, Frederick Buechner,
I love
Nowen, those guys. So it's I think probably one of the main reasons that a lot of writers don't really excel. And I deal with songwriters, all the time. They're not resourcing themselves.
Right.
They don't read broadly, no offense to any of the straight ahead, evangelical writers, because there's a lot of great ones, but they don't tend to go into to some imaginative, creative spaces.
Right.
And I can always tell when a writer has not been a reader because it's rehash of everything that was on Christian radio 10 years ago.
Right.
And so I'm always encouraging them to read the kind of people that we're talking about.
I mean, the way that I've always felt since I started writing music, I was always a reader, but when I started writing songs, I started sensing that in part what I was doing when I would read and when I read now is like storing away nuts for the winter. And you never know when you will need one of them, when you will be in need of inspiration, and when one of those things will come to you, like a North Star, you know? And if you're not storing them away on a regular basis, it's very difficult to utilize that kind of thing. I use a lot of, I do like to set people's writing to music as well. I've done that before, but more often what happens is something I read once, a sentence or a paragraph by somebody, presents itself to me in a moment when I don't know what to say, and it reminds me of what how my heart reacted reading it. And so I just like to say you are what you eat, you know.
It's true, isn't it?
When it comes to reading.
It's really true. I have one song that I wrote with my friend David Baroni. It's called O Mighty Cross, and it was from an ancient document I found in somebody's newsletter. Grabbed the title, wrote the song. It's in 2 hymnals. And, you know, and I have another song called Christ Above Me that is based on the breastplate of St. Patrick. 4th century document, and it's been used at St. B's forever here in town. And so I know that you love that as well. It's the role of historical documents. And do you feel that's obviously influenced you? Ubi Caritas, you know, beautiful on that record. Do you feel like a lot of that has been lost kind of on the evangelical world and the Christian music scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an increasingly more open spirit towards that from the evangelical world, for sure. So I think that's great. I think even Catholicism has lost touch with it in a musical sense. The Anglican Church is much more, its choral tradition is much better in modern day anyway. And the Catholic Church has a lot of nice, cheesy 70s hymns in its hymnals. They're okay, but they're not ancient or inspired by that in any way. I don't know if you've ever heard, and I'm not saying there's no place for them, but you have a whole hymnal full of songs like Lord of the Dance, which is a shaker tune with a weird, yeah, it's strange. I mean, you're just kind of, it's like, this is not the church. The tradition of the church's music is so broad and so rich. Why would this be the only thing we're using? So modern in a very non-artistic way. And so I think the church at large in the West has lost touch with its roots in music. The Orthodox Church, not so much. The Anglican Church has done a pretty good job with its choral tradition, but the Catholic Church, even with such a rich history, it's interesting. But so I do try to write songs that are inspired by those types of texts.
And so obviously that influences your word choices, your phrasing, just kind of where you're going even with a hook. And you're such a wordsmith. I mean, how do you look at something like that and pick out a hook? Or does it just hit you?
The first example that I can think of is that song Restless that's on my first album, which has been one of my most popular songs to date still. I think it's just about simplicity, really, when it comes to hooks. So that passage in Confessions is incredibly written and poetic and wordy, but he has one sentence that says, "You have made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Restless until they rest in you is a simple but poetic phrase, and so I latched onto it as soon as I read it and wrote the chorus to that song. It is a challenge to look at some of those texts. I mean, well, and with Ubi Caritas, as you mentioned, is a 4th century. There's like debatable origins as far as when, but a text that is traditionally used on Holy Thursday at the washing of the feet. And loosely translates to where love and charity are, God is there. That's kind of the meat of the text. But that one, I went in a more Celtic direction because I didn't see how you could make that into like a song with a chorus. It's more like an Irish folk tune, with no repeating sections. It just depends on what what it's for. If you're trying to write a worship chorus, I think simplicity is probably how you do that. Not like watering it down, but finding something that sounds alliterative but simple. It's a challenge. I mean, it's different with everything.
Right.
It depends on what you're trying to do.
So how do you fashion poetry into lyric?
In the sense of someone else's poetry, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, or...
Yeah. Well, I have tried different things, and some of them have been more successful than others in the sense that, I have a song on Fortunate Fall that's called Lead Kindly Light, which is a poem by Cardinal Newman. And I mostly didn't change it. I just sort of deleted a few things and moved a few things and made it rhyme in ways that made sense for my melody. I didn't really do much to it. So I sort of set it to music in a way that his meter made that possible, But I wrote a song years ago with my friend Seth Jones, who I'm now in this band Lev with, that's based on Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And I love this song so much. I took so many liberties with the poem. It was probably totally audacious and rude and terrible, but I fell in love with this and sent it to my publisher at the time, and they said his estate will never approve this. They're very closed-fisted about his work anyway, and I had moved lines around and changed a few words. They're like, sorry, this is never happening. So that song will never see the light of day because I took too many liberties. I mean, it just, depending on whose work it is and what it's for, it can be a real challenge to do it justice and to be considerate of it. And so, I've done the gamut of those things. But typically just trying to keep the structure very sort of similar to what it is in the written form. I think a lot of things don't sing as well as they read with poetry, so you do have to figure out how to get around that. But
right.
Like I have a song called Death Be Not Proud, which is a John Donne poem, and I couldn't just sing that and get the effect I wanted. So again, I sort of just took lines out of it and put them together. And, he's long gone, so I can do that without any repercussions in terms of publishing, but I couldn't. It'd be hard to write the kind of song I was trying to write and do it exactly verbatim. Right. Because it's wonderful read.
I think we should do one with Batter My Heart, 3-person pod.
I love that song.
Let's do that one.
It's so good,
Gosh.
It's a good one.
Yeah, you guys go look that up if you don't know what it is. John Donne, crazy.
Yeah, it's the last line of that, nor chaste lest thou ravish me, which is a really Song of Solomon type of line.
It really is.
It's good.
I mean, basically rapacious. I mean, just overwhelmed with passion.
Yeah. That reminds me of that Bernini statue of the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. Have you seen that?
No.
She had a vision, a beatific vision, a vision in the spirit at some point in her life of the angel of the Lord plunging a fiery arrow into her heart over and over. Wow. And in the statue Bernini did of that, her head is back and her toes are curling.
Oh my gosh.
It's in Spain somewhere.
Wow.
Anyway, I wrote a song for our first Love record based on that statue, called Arrow, which is one of my favorite things I've ever written. But anyway. Well,
maybe you probably know, I'm sure you know Gerard Manley Hopkins, God's Grandeur.
I had a single on my first radio single was based on
Relentless?
As Kingfishers Catch Fire.
Oh my gosh.
Which the chorus, it's called For Love of You, and it says, for love of you, I'm a sky on fire. But the first line is, you live in a million places, your fingerprints can be seen on a million faces. And it's inspired by
Christ in 10,000 places.
Yeah.
Yes, 10,000 places or faces.
Places. But that is a line I believe from As Kingfishers Catch Fire.
Yes.
Which is for Christ plays in 10,000 places, and oh gosh, I forgot the next line. But Yeah, so I was loosely inspired by that poem.
Love that.
So you can put that on the radio. You just have to disguise it well enough, I guess. Didn't do very well, of course.
But it's amazing. Well, just as we kind of wrap up, do you have any tips? I hate tips, tricks, and hacks. I hate it.
Hey, they can be helpful.
They can be helpful, because I just don't think life has.
How about exercises?
Okay. Or anything that you think would be helpful to our songwriters.
I'm all about exercises with songwriting, and I still engage in them regularly for myself. So my method has been, since the beginning, to pick constraints and stick to them for a certain agreed upon amount of time. So the first year that I was writing, I spent 30 days writing one song every day from start to finish, no matter how much I thought it sucked or it was terrible, but I had to finish it. That was the rule. And to me, it was like priming a pump of soap, like to get it to start flowing. I really recommend that for writers of anything. If you're a poet, if you like to write poems, if you like to write short stories, it's like, we'll do that for 30 days straight every day and see what happens at the end. You may keep nothing, but your skills and your ability to listen to yourself will have grown exponentially at the end of that 30 days. So I still undertake things like that regularly. That's one. There was a time where I picked, I'm a piano player, and any piano player knows that the sustain pedal is essential to a good sound. And I one time wrote a few songs without it to make me play differently. I just think it's a really good thing to say, I'm going to pick a few constraints, whatever they are, I'll decide and try it out. And because it makes you, it's like a hack for your brain patterns. You sort of know where your go-to is, where your comfort zone is. And I never want to get stuck in a rut with my writing. And so that's why I pick constraints like that as exercises.
So it's like a disruption.
Yeah, sort of disrupt whatever you would naturally do and do it for a while very differently, and don't let yourself fall back on your old, because you can always do that,
Right.
And I have written plenty of stuff that I would never use, but it's just a good exercise for myself. So that would be my tip.
It's very cool. That's a great tip. It's like taking a tool off the table, right? And doing something different.
Yep.
Speaking of the sustain pedal, my wife and I love to go to the Nashville Jazz Workshop and watch B.G. Adair, who at the B.G. Adair Trio. She's 80. Killer, world class, travels Europe, just crazy. She hardly ever uses the sustain. It's crazy.
It's
Every
impressive when people can do that.
I know. I mean, I'm staring at her foot. I'm not even looking at her fingers. I'm watching her foot, and every now and then it sneaks up and hits the sustain when she wants it, and that's it.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a tough thing to do, but.
Well, what's next for you, Audrey?
Well, I'm having a baby in October, so that's
Congratulations.
Gonna happen. Thank you. Before I have the baby, I am recording a new album, which I don't totally have a grasp on yet. Working title is Evergreen. We'll see. And then I'm taking the last quarter of the year off for obvious reasons. Releasing the record hopefully early next year. So that's kind of what's on the horizon right now. And my band Lev has a bunch of singles that are kind of rolling out right now. So if anybody's interested in that, it's LEVV. We have songs that will never be on a worship album. But if that's your thing, if you like EDM music that doesn't suck, check us out.
That's going to be the title of this podcast. Yeah. EDM that doesn't suck with Audrey Assad. Well, where can our listeners catch up with you and find out about Lev?
Yeah.
Go deep into your catalog, social, that kind of thing.
So I'm really active on Twitter, social media, especially Twitter, but I am on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all under Audrey Assad. I think Facebook is Audrey Assad Music. My website has a link to my blog, audreyassad.com, and music and merch and tour dates and all of that. But if you want to actually interact with me, Twitter is the place. I am there a lot, probably too much.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time today. I know that we could have gone a million different directions, and
thanks for having me.
Hope there'll be a next time. And congratulations on your baby.
Thank you.
And on your band. Incredibly deep, thoughtful, provocative music. One of the things that's happening for me in doing this podcast is we call it Song Revolution because so many people are so down on Christian music,
right.
For a lot of different reasons. But it's like, I don't think people can say that if they go deep into people such as yourself.
I mean, you hear a lot of people disparage pop music too, and there's so much great stuff out there.
I know, right?
You know what I mean? It's just you can't look at the radio for the only indication of what something a genre has to offer.
Be resourceful. Great. Thank you, Audrey. This has been great. This is John Chisum for the Song Revolution podcast. You guys, go check out everything Audrey is all about, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for being here today for the Song Revolution podcast from Nashville Christian Songwriters. We exist to empower you and to bring you some of the greatest inspiration, insights, and important people from the Christian music world to help you write your best and to be heard as the songwriter that you were born to be. Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us over on Twitter and Instagram, and connect with us through our Facebook group called Successful Christian Songwriters. Until next time, I'm John Chisum calling you to a Song Revolution.